Hello, my name is Yuri. I write screenplays just as a novice writer. I haven't sold anything, so take it all with a grain of salt, what I'm saying here. But I have looked into a lot of theories, a lot of books on the subject, a lot of formulas to write an effective screenplay. And so I wanted to make a beginner guide for people wanting to write a screenplay but worrying about fucking up somewhere. And so this is how I do it. This is how I write all my screenplays. And one thing I really recommend is an outline. That's something a lot of writers don't do because they don't really know what an outline is or why it helps you write a better screenplay than you would otherwise do. So a lot of writers just sit down and write. I did that at the start. I just wrote, and then after months of writing you could end up with something that was just terrible. That's just, you have to work really really hard on it to even make it acceptable. And when you have an outline and you know what you're doing, it's you save so much time. You already know from the get-go if your project is good or not, and you always can fix it along the way, and you always know how it's structured and how to change the structure around. And so I'll introduce you to this hint of how you can save a lot of time and a lot of just go from being a novice writer to being a writer who can pull off some great work. So let's look at this. This is how I do it, and I think a lot of people do it this way. First, I get a big idea, and it comes along with a lot of thinking about character, a lot of thinking about theme and setting. But firstly, I have a good idea. I just think about settings, for example, fireman or policeman or schools or students or whatever, or a murder investigation, and then I come up with something that's cool or clever in this concept. So something that will shed some new light on this theme or this idea or this setting. So it can be, for example, a time machine. Hey, a murder investigation, but now we have a time machine. Oh, that's cool. Okay, what can I do with that, right? So you kind of try to reinvent the genre. You still try to introduce the genre, but you also try to introduce new concepts into the genre so that people can learn new things about this setting or learn things about themselves or society as a whole. So, for example, let's take The Endless. It's a movie about a cult and two brothers visiting that cult after being away from it for 10 years. So, what's the great big idea there? That's that these two brothers try to investigate if there's something weird about the cult or the people are just weird. So, is there something magical about the cult or not? Right? That's a great idea, really good idea. But then you also have the setting, and that's setting and topic. So, for example, if you write about lawyers, you probably need to know a bit about lawyers. What terms do they use? Where do they work? Who do they work with? What are their working hours? How do they speak to each other? What about marriage, marriage? What do they do in a courtroom? All that you need to know, right? So, even though you have this great idea about, let's say, Endless again, you have a cult and you have this great idea about a cult. If you don't know anything about cults, then this movie will feel empty, will feel like you kind of not introducing enough stuff and you're not really making the topic exciting and interesting. Because if you need to make a topic interesting and exciting, you need to introduce deeper things about that topic. So one thing I do is watch movies, all the movies I can about cults, for example. I watch all the documentaries I can, at least in the language I understand them in. And then I read books, and I just search for information. For a feature film, 90 pages and up, you kind of need to read a lot of books and a lot of hard literature, and also do some interviews preferably. For a short film, you don't need as much knowledge. You probably need to read a few books and then watch all the movies you can, all the documentaries. But doing interviews, I don't do that for short films at all, because it's just, it's probably too much work for what you put out there. That's just my personal opinion, but maybe someone has some other understanding of it. And then a theme, of course, because now you have the big idea, you have the setting. So let's say my big idea is that two brothers, they go into a cult, go back into a cult to try to investigate if there's something weird about this cult. But then I have the setting, that's a cult, and now I need a theme, because without a theme you have no story. A story is a personal or social teaching about life, right? That's why we have stories, that's why people tell each other stories, that's why we sat around the fireplace and told each other stories about moral rules, or people who broke moral rules and then kind of suffered, or people who learned something and then could achieve great success in life. So, for example, a mother will tell her daughter that you need to really be careful about men, because otherwise this and this will happen, because this happened to me, so now I'm telling you this story. So you're kind of teaching people about your personal experiences in life and social rules. And for the Endless, the theme is that these are two brothers, and one brother is dominating the other brother. He took him out of the cult, and this weak brother, he wants to go back to the cult because he's just suffering. He doesn't have any freedom in his current life. He wants to go back to his friends in the cult, and the big brother, of course, wants to protect him. So now you have this theme of the conflict of wanting to escape from someone ruling over you, and this theme is just so much there in this movie, The Endless. That's the point of telling the story, because the cult thing is cool, and the big idea of there being something magical or not about it is super cool. But without this theme of being captured by something stronger, something that wants to rule over you, you have nothing. You have no movie. You just have some scenes, right? Some action scenes. And how you create a theme is just knowing your characters. Because if a story is a moral teaching, then you need to understand how a moral teaching works, right? There's a good guy, or maybe a clueless guy, who's trying to do the best he can in the current society, but then he gets some wrong information, or maybe he lives in a bad society. So he kind of needs to meet this good side, or understand something more about society, so that he can learn something and become a more moral human being. That's a good story where the hero, he advances through some steps and learns something about society, and also attacks this destructive side. He attacks the antagonist, and he becomes the hero, right? Because he develops in this moral team. I forgot something, I think. I forgot to say that, of course, you can have other stories. For example, the hero can lose, right? At the end, he can try to learn something good, and then he can fight and fight, but then he can lose. And you have some of these kind of movies and books, but they often end on a low note. So it's really, really hard to pull it off effectively. And what I'm saying here about all this theme and setting and the big idea, it's all something that happens in 99% of movies. So it's often there, and it's often super effective, and it's all there in blockbusters. Every blockbuster you've seen uses these techniques. But of course, if you want to do something else, you can do that. You are welcome to do that. But unless you're already a great writer, then there's a big chance that you will just make some mistakes somewhere and not construct a good story if you try something different. So try to learn all about this, how to create a strong team, how to create a good setting, and then once you're good at it, once you're good at creating blockbusters and earning your millions, then okay, maybe you should try something deeper, right? Something more complicated. But what I see is that people, they just jump into the complicated area right away in the first script, and then the first script is just horrible. And that's okay. That's okay. There's no problem with that. Every first script ever is horrible. I mean, you learn by writing 10, 20 scripts, and then you become kind of okay as a writer. But if you don't understand all these topics, then you don't know how to create a good script while cheating. So sometimes you can cheat and create a script where, for example, the antagonist is the hero or the one we follow, but you still need to understand the rules to know how to break them and to know how effectively work your way around them. So you need to be an expert writer to write something outside of these rules, but you are welcome to do that. Okay, one thing you also need to know, very, very important, is that characters have needs and wants. They are needs and wants. So characters, they act from themselves, from inside out, and you don't need to control them because you just need to create great characters to get somewhere with them. What I do often is just create character sheets, so I write down the characters I have and what their wants and needs are. And sometimes I reveal their wants and needs slowly, but I can only do that if I already know who these characters are. And I cannot just boss them around, and also I cannot just introduce a world and then have characters just play around in the world or do nothing and let the world just work itself on top of the characters. I need the characters to fight as much as possible. So every scene is a new problem, and there's a great problem they have to solve to get this moral teaching. And all characters, at least the characters that are interesting, need to be proactive. So they always try to do something. In every scene, they try to solve some problem or get somewhere in life. Proactivity is extremely important. Again, if you forget this, maybe you can work yourself around this proactivity, but in 99% of movies, you have this proactive character and you have more proactive characters. And that's what people want to see. So maybe you can break these rules, that's okay, but just know that if you break these rules, then you probably screw up, okay? And what these characters do in your story, of course, they talk to each other, but dialogue is actually the minimal part of a movie, because plot is the interesting thing. Plot and proactivity of these characters and trying to solve goals and achieve something in life, that's the interesting thing, because viewers want to watch someone who wants to do something and doesn't want something bad to happen to them. So that's what viewers want, that's what we seek. And if you don't understand that there needs to be some goals all the time, some great goals and important goals all the time, and conflict and proactivity, characters fighting for resources, fighting for mates, or fighting for value, fighting for gold, then you don't create an effective story to capture the viewer. So the characters use dialogue to get somewhere in life, to be proactive, to achieve a goal. So don't use dialogue, and I will explain to you how you will not overuse that dialogue, but you will use it effectively and minimally. And one thing to think about is just that dialogue is, for me, it's the last means, right? Because a bully is introduced because he's bullying. A good girl is shown by her helping someone. A clever person is shown by some visual scene. For example, he solves a complicated 3D puzzle or something like that, right? Or he solves a social conflict situation in a clever way. So you always have these interactive scenes that reveal character. That's how you reveal character, right? Because if there's no problem, you don't need a character, because there's nothing to do. So you create problems and you make these characters solve problems, and then we discover who they truly are. And then you of course use dialogue in this kind of setting, and sometimes you use dialogue to kind of explain what they're feeling about the situation, so that you can create some emotional bond. But you don't just use dialogue for fun. You create these action scenes that are proactive and drag the plot along. And yeah, this is just some of the personality types you can look at, and you can look at a billion other lists. This is not scientific or anything. It's just, for me, it's good to know that, I can look at this list from time to time just to kind of understand that there's a lot of work to do, and also I can get inspiration from here. So for example, if you need a character that's kind of doesn't know something, like in the end list, they don't know about this cult, what is this cult, then I probably need them to be clever adapting. I could do that. I could also methodological, a bit maybe boring. The mastermind can be this, so he's like behind the scenes. or maybe a detective. So you can just work yourself around and see what you need or what you don't need. But the real personality types are Ocean, Big Five. So you have these Big Five personality types. They are the real personality types. But you can also use these unscientific lists to kind of look at colors like this. For example, in all scenes, I try to have energy, I try to have emotions, I try to have conflict, I try to have problems being solved. So always drag the plot along and always know that you need to use emotions, and you also need to have the reader feel some emotions with every scene. And if you are not introducing characters, and if you're not making characters proactive, then you have a big problem making the readers empathize with the characters and making the readers care about your screenplay. So preferably you should have the readers be like not in extreme emotional state, but I mean feeling really sad when something goes bad and feeling really happy when something is solved. And they can only do that if they are collecting clues by themselves. So you kind of need to have the upper hand all the time, always know where the reader is, and always use emotions, because emotions is how we communicate as human beings. That's how we learn about social or moral rules in society. Also, these kind of emotions, of course, I have a billion of these charts too, also not scientific, but I think from if you just look into the dictionary, you'll find all emotions. So I mean, it's unscientific, but then not that much, because I mean these are real emotions that we have as human beings. It's just that these lists are probably not that scientific, but whatever. And how do you all put it all together? Because first thing I do is just know who my characters are. I know the big idea, and I know to present the theme well, I have to have strong characters, and I need them to have the correct bad sides and the correct good sides, so that the team can work, so that the moral team can be really strong in my screenplay. And I also need to have an outline for the plot, and I will explain more about that later. But how you create an outline, just write down the story. You know all the characters, you know the moral tale you want to tell, you know the setting. You're an expert at the setting because you have read 10 books about it. So now you write an outline, and that's important because most scripts I read are 30% too long. And I'm not exaggerating here at all. I could literally take a random script from the internet, delete 30% of the pages, and you wouldn't even notice they were missing. Why? Because when people don't outline, then they tend to extend scenes, they tend to write too much, and they tend to not focus on the plot by just focus too much on the scene itself. So for example, if they have a girl and boy talking about how much they like each other, they could write 5 pages, that's 5 minutes screen time, just of this boy talking to a girl about how much he likes her. And you're not moving the plot along, right? And the scene is not interesting because there's no conflict, no one is fighting for resources, no one is learning anything. I mean, they're learning a bit, but not enough to make the scene super interesting. So I see this mistake in, I think, pretty much all screenplays that are not outlining. And also myself, I don't outline that much when I write 5 pages. But then when I go write 10 pages or 15 pages, I need to outline. So you can outline however you want. How I do it is just make sure I know all the clues I have for the story. I mean, who learns what when, where do characters come in, and how do characters get defeated by the good guys. And also, one thing I do is just make sure I always add proactivity. So the lead is always proactive and always very proactive. And if I forget that in the outline, then the script won't work. So that's super important. And if you write a script, you can always, often you forget about making a character proactive. And if I write an outline, I can easily fix that. And if I want to have some character be less proactive, I can always do that later on. But unless you have the characters finding the goals, finding the clues, then your story probably won't work because the clues will just fall onto the lap. And this is how you could outline. You can use some of these kind of also unscientific lists about, well, some hero is going to a journey and then he's discovering something new and learning, but he also making mistakes along the way that he's learning from. Maybe he's also nearly giving up at the middle part, and he's also meeting people who can teach him something about life. So this is the hero's journey. You can always use a more basic structure about why does a plot work, why does it not work. Well, it's because someone needs to learn something, discover something about the world, but if you just ask someone and gets an answer, it's boring and then also not really effective storytelling, because how we learn is learned by other people's mistakes. So if I know that someone made a mistake along the way but then learned something and became a more successful human being, then I want to learn about that, right? If I know that someone became super rich and got 10 hot wives because he did something, then, well, I want to know what he did. But if he just tells me that, well, he was just working hard, it's not really, I mean, yeah, it's it kind of illustrates his points, but it's better if your story is about, well, when I was your age, I didn't work that hard, and then I nearly lost my way. Oh, now it's interesting, right? So he nearly fucked up in life because he didn't work hard. But then I found someone who told me that I should work hard, and then I started to work hard. Okay, now it's a moral tale, okay? You fail if you don't do X, and if you do X, you succeed. Now it's interesting. And I can learn something from that experience because I know, well, it's not just because he drank some milk and became famous. His story makes sense that he worked hard and then he became famous, because when he didn't work hard, he didn't get famous or he didn't get rich. So, I mean, he has more than one proof of his moral tale. And of course, I have a billion of these. You can use this of how, plan fails. You have this plan fail. You try something, fails, and then the change, revelation, the twist, the new world. The new world is the learning, right? Because call to action is that he lives in a world that something doesn't work, but he kind of accepts it, and then he, the reluctant hero, he's called to action because, I mean, now it's getting too much. He needs to do something, but along the way he also gives up for a bit because, well, it's too hard. I need to fight too much, and then he learns how to change it. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of writers, a lot of different theories about how to create structure, but they all actually have the same structure for stories. I mean, yeah, not really a surprise, is it? Because that's how we tell stories to each other. Okay, without this outline, as I told you already, just my experience is that when people start writing, they are really interested in their own idea. They think their own idea is super fun and interesting, and that's fine. But only you or someone exactly like you will enjoy that idea unless you're a good writer. And being a good writer is also really understanding what a plot is and what good pacing is. And that's what you get from outlining. You understand that when I outline something, then I can really structure the pacing so that the reveals and the clues come at the right times. And that's of course something you do with the outline, but also when you write, I have some rules of thumb that I use. Dialogue max 3 lines, so no monologuing for 1 minute. Action paragraphs max 3 lines. A lot of people write a lot of action paragraphs, just pages up and down. Doesn't really work because a director needs to know what happens and what doesn't happen, right? So this happens because it's relevant to the plot, and if something else happens that's interesting or funny, I mean, they could just film something else themselves. Unless it's plot relevant, then try to not include it. I think I will talk a bit more about it. No, I won't. I will tell you about it now. It's because a script and a plot is other characters revealing themselves, so they're revealing who they are as a proactive human being, so that they can work out problems later on, and viewers will understand why they're using these solutions they're using, wrong or right solutions. For example, if you want to introduce a soldier, you make him solve some great problem by killing people, and then you have introduced this cool soldier that's good at solving problems, like in Predator, where you see the soldiers solving problems, and you know they're cool at solving problems, and you also know that they just attack full on and just destroy everything in their way. But then they get a bigger problem they need to solve, but you already know how they will solve it, so you're already engaged in the plot because you know all the characters and you know what they will do, and you also know that they are proactive human beings. They won't just run, but they will try to solve the problems. So that's what you do. You reveal character or you reveal plot, always. And if you don't do that, you delete it. So dialogue max 3 lines, action paragraph max 3 lines, scenes about 2 pages, so you have 50 pages in a screenplay. But of course you can cheat a lot here. I actually tried to find an example of all of these rules of thumb. Dialogue max 3 lines, action paragraph max 3 lines, just 1 page in any screenplay. And I actually had a bit of problem doing that because all writers cheat all the time on all the things I said in this presentation. We cheat all the time. We always try to do our own thing. We try to be creative. We try to, write a few more ideas than actually maybe fit on the page. We try to maybe add too many characters, so we need to remove some characters. But sometimes there are a lot of ideas fighting for screen time, and that makes a scene super interesting, and also a lot of characters fighting for resources. But it also means that I seldom follow all these rules precisely, but usually I do that, so yeah, so that the pacing is not broken completely. But if you can remove a line, paragraph, a scene, I will strongly suggest you do that. Maybe 95% of screenplays I read, they have 30% too many pages at least. So they have a plot, and the plot could be good, but they just, they don't know how to tell the story effectively. They don't know how to start late and end early in every scene. And every scene needs to be a movie by itself. It needs to be interesting. It needs to be a problem not solved. So think about this. If 95% of actors do this, if they write 30% too much, maybe you are doing that too. Maybe. And if I can read your script and remove 30% of your pages without the next reader noticing it, then you have a huge problem on your hand. And action, keep it as short as possible. Tell us about the main elements. If the dialogue conveys some action, maybe you can not have that action there. For example, if someone is screaming at someone, you probably know that they are swinging their arms around and showing emotion via their movements, and actors know how to do that. But the action is the plot that or character reveal. So the character does something, so we learn more about him, or he's trying to solve a problem with some character traits that we already know about. It's not hard, but just don't tell too much anywhere. Keep to the plot, keep to the story, and know that screenplays are not the most interesting thing to read. They're not really written for readers. So even if you really love a movie, I love a lot of movies, when I read the screenplay, I'm not really as engaged as I am in the movie, where I see the actors do something funny. I see the cool CGI, I see the cool action scenes, and I see the emotion on screen. So that's why if you write too much, your screenplay won't even get picked up, because maybe you have some good ideas there, but you need to be effective at telling your story, because 1 page is 1 minute, and if you spend 3 pages telling 1 minute worth of story, then that's pretty boring, right? And it's extra boring on screenplay. So One thing you do when you have finished the screenplay is just getting feedback, getting as much feedback as you can. People giving you feedback cannot be wrong. As I told you before, they need to be emotionally invested in the screenplay. If they are not, that maybe your main idea is still good. I mean, a time machine is a cool thing, but maybe you need to make the characters more proactive or make them deeper, more interesting in that how they solve problems. So they're all separate characters with all their own wants and needs, and the dialogue is also spiced up a bit. So it's not direct exposition, on the nose exposition, really bad, where you have characters just saying, well, I want to get this girl and I want to get rich, and I will do that by stealing money from this bank. Instead, you kind of make it natural by someone. Maybe his car breaks down on the road, so he's looking at his car, and we feel that, well, he's really suffering, and then he's maybe not looking at his bank account. Maybe he's talking to someone at the bank, and he's getting information about his bank account that, well, he doesn't have that much money in his bank account. Of course, he's just not looking at the computer screen because that's boring. He's talking to a person. So we kind of learn that now, well, he needs money. This person, he wants some resources. So instead of just telling the viewer directly, you have these characters just acting out whatever they want to act out. You don't force it upon them. And this is something reviewers, they really notice when the character is deep and interesting, then you have something going for the story. Yeah. And the reader also needs to understand everything, so maybe you understand a bit more about how lawyers work or something works, and maybe you didn't quite illustrate it enough in the scene. You kind of assume, well, a lawyer walks into the courtroom, and then you assume that the reader will understand that the lawyer is talking to a judge about something. Well, maybe the reader needs to understand that by reading it. Shall I write new scripts while I wait for an answer? And again here, there's a lot of ways people fail. As I wrote, they don't write outline. That's most writers fail there. Pacing issues is a huge one. I mean, that's nearly every script I read, pacing issues. Also conflict issues, you don't have enough conflict or you don't have any problems. You're just trying to kind of have people talk about the drug use without illustrating it via a story. So you're not telling me a moral tale, you're just showing me people who are talking about using drugs. I won't really learn anything about that because I know that they're just conveying their own thoughts on the subject. But one great problem is that just when I write, but I think most of the time I actually spend on contacting people and contacting possible directors, producers, contacting other writers, looking for feedback, looking for people who will like read my stuff or tell me how to improve it so I can get somewhere with it. But that's just a problem because you spend a lot of time on this, just looking for people who can help you out with your problems of not getting anywhere or getting somewhere big, like getting a blockbuster out there or something like that. But if you only have a few screenplays, it's a big problem because then you're looking for a very specific and unique director. But if you have 10 or 20 great screenplays, then it will be so much easier finding someone who will direct your stuff because you always have something else to fall back on. And also hear stories about how people got into the industry, and sometimes you have a good script but it takes 10 years to get it produced. So if you only have 2 great scripts and they are both in production, I mean, it could take 10 years before your name is even out there. So what do you do in the meantime? And that's something I really need to keep reminding myself, that most projects, they don't even get picked up, so there are no directors to pick them up because most scripts are crap. But even the good scripts that are picked up, a lot of the projects just fail because, I mean, money issues often, but can be anything. You can be an actor not wanting to act anyway, or there's some conflict, time conflict, or something else, or they get a better script, or a lot of stuff can happen. So a lot of your project can fall apart, and unless you have enough projects out there, then you will just, fall on your ass, and it will hurt badly. So for me, one thing I want to tell people is just keep writing, keep working hard, keep making outlines, keep producing ideas, keep really working at your scripts. Ideas are worth nothing. Outlines are pretty much worthless, but an outline is the hard part. I write an outline, then I can write a script in a few days. It's not hard writing the script, that's easy, everyone can do that. But creating a good story is really, really hard. So keep working at it, and don't just think that, well, if I write one script or two scripts and they're good, that's enough. That's really, for most people, that's not the case, and you need to always sell to remain in this business. A lot of people write one script and it's amazing, and then because they got a lot of help from other people and they got the script rewritten a lot, but then after that they don't do anything. They just, they think that everything will be handed to them on a silver plate, and then nothing happens. They just disappear from the industry. So yeah, that's all what I have to say about this. And I'm just a novice writer. I don't sell screenplays or anything like that, but I do have a good structure for creating interesting scripts that are read by people, and some of them are interesting to other readers because I've just learned from my own mistakes. That's my moral tale here: learning from your own mistakes and improving as a writer. Thank you.